in the frozen heart of a medieval winter, where frost crept along the walls of peasant huts and every breath hung heavy in the air like a ghost. Survival was not guaranteed, it was earned, day by day, in a war against nature itself. Imagine waking up on a dirt floor, wrapped in nothing but a threadbare wool blanket. The sound of the wind rattling the thatched roof above you. Your stomach is hollow, your hands cracked and raw, and yet the day demands you rise. Because if you do not fight the cold, if you do not find warmth, food and water, then winter will claim you before the spring sun ever dares to return. This is not the story of kings and their castles or knights in their armor. This is the brutal reality of peasants, the men, women, and children who endured freezing winters without the modern comforts we take for granted. And the only question left is this: could you survive as they did? Life for a medieval peasant in winter was stripped to its bones, just like the trees that surrounded their villages. A peasant's home was a single-room hut, walls built of wattle and daub sticks smeared with mud and straw, hardly enough to stop the piercing wind. The roof thatched with reeds, often sagged beneath the weight of snow, leaking droplets of icy water that froze in the corners of the room. There was no chimney, just a hole in the roof where smoke from the hearth trickled out, filling the room with haze that stung the eyes and blackened the lungs. The floor beneath you was packed dirt, cold and unyielding, where rats scurried at night to gnaw at scraps of food. Yet for a peasant family, this was not misery, it was simply home. Inside, survival depended on the hearth. A small fire burned, not to warm the room fully, that was impossible, but to keep the frost from killing. Firewood was scarce, gathered in the months before, and rationed with care. A log thrown too quickly onto the flames was a mistake that could cost you heat in the weeks ahead. Every ember was precious, and families kept their fires smoldering through the night, banking the coals beneath ash so they would spark again at dawn. Around the hearth, the family huddled together, bodies pressed close, not for comfort but for survival. Even animals, goats, chickens, sometimes a pig or cow, were brought inside, their body heat mingling with the humans, raising the temperature of the hut by just enough to make the difference between life and death. The smell was suffocating, a mix of smoke, manure, and unwashed bodies, but no one complained. Warmth was worth more than air. Clothing was no luxury either. Forget thick coats and boots. A peasant's garments were made of rough wool, spun and stitched by hand, often handed down until they fell apart. Layers of patched tunics and cloaks were the only defense against the cold. Feet were wrapped in leather, stuffed with straw when shoes fell apart. Hands cracked and bled from the cold, red and raw, but gloves were rare. Children often went barefoot even in snow, their skin toughened by necessity. To live meant to endure discomfort, and no one expected anything else. Then came food, or rather, the constant lack of it. Autumn's harvest was stored in cellars, but by winter's peak, the supplies dwindled dangerously. Bread made from barley or rye was a staple, often hard and coarse. Vegetables like turnips, onions, and cabbages were stored in pits, shriveled but still edible. Meat was rare, preserved with salt when possible, though salt itself was expensive. Most peasants relied on pottage, a thin stew of whatever grains, vegetables, or scraps were left. Some days it was little more than water thickened with stale bread. Hunger gnawed constantly, bellies never quite full. Malnutrition weakened bodies, leaving them vulnerable to sickness that spread easily and cramped. Smoky huts. Water was no simple matter. Wells could freeze, streams turned solid. Snow was melted for drinking, a slow process that consumed precious firewood. Sometimes, families collected icicles, letting them drip into clay pots. Each drop a reminder that survival was measured not in feasts but in sips. Outside, the world was silent and merciless. Fields lay dormant beneath snow. Livestock huddled in barns, if they were lucky, or perished in the open if not. The village itself seemed asleep, paths buried, doors shut tight against the wind. Yet peasants could not remain indoors forever. Firewood had to be gathered, animals fed, roofs repaired, no matter the weather. Stepping outside meant braving the sting of snow on your face, your breath freezing in your chest, your feet crunching on ice. And still, there was work. Survival did not pause for winter's cruelty. Community, more than anything, was a lifeline. Alone, a family might starve. Together, villagers shared what little they had. Neighbors helped repair huts, shared embers when fires went out, and pooled food in desperate times. It was not generosity, it was survival, because if one family perished, the others knew it weakened the whole. Winter was not just endured individually, it was endured collectively. Meanwhile, those tasked with building castles and cathedrals had no choice but to work through the cold. Imagine carrying stones with numb fingers, the mortar freezing before it set. Fires burning at construction sites just to keep the mixture soft enough to use. Workers collapsed from exhaustion or froze where they stood, their bodies quietly taken away. The grand monuments of the Middle Ages were not just crafted with stone, they were paid for with human suffering, especially in winter. The wealthy, too, felt the cold, though their struggle was different. In castles, stone walls trapped the chill, and tapestries hung to block drafts. Fires roared in great halls, but still, guests could see their breath while they dined. Lords and ladies wore furs and silks, yet they too huddled close to hearths. At night, they retreated under piles of heavy blankets. Even wealth could not banish the cold, it only softened it. But peasants, with their mud huts and threadbare cloaks, bore the brunt of winter's cruelty. Disease spread easily in such conditions. Smoke-filled lungs turned to coughs, coughs turned to fevers, fevers turned to death. Pneumonia, influenza, and infections claimed countless lives.
Could you lie on a dirt
With weakened
floor,
bodies
your
from
children
hunger,
pressed
survival
against
rates
you for
plummeted.
warmth,
Medicine
and
was
still wake
primitive
up each
herbs,
morning
charms,
ready to fight
whispered
another
prayers.
day?
Priests offered blessings, healers offered salves, but more often than not, the sick did not rise again. Winter became not just a season but a culling. Yet, life persisted. Children still played in the snow, their laughter piercing the silence of long nights. Families sang by the fire, telling stories to pass the hours of darkness. Villagers attended church, faith giving them strength to endure. Love bloomed even in barns and by hearths. Couples finding warmth in each other when the cold world offered none. These small moments of joy were not trivial, they were rebellion against despair. Each day survived was a victory. Each winter endured was proof of resilience. Peasants did not think of comfort, they thought of endurance, and that endurance, repeated year after year, carried their families, their villages, their very way of life forward. Now place yourself there. Could you survive without your heated homes, your stocked fridges, your padded coats? Could you lie on a dirt floor, your children pressed against you for warmth, and still wake up each morning ready to fight another day? Could you swing an axe into frozen wood with numb hands, knowing without it, the fire would die? Could you share your last scrap of bread with a neighbor, not out of kindness but because their survival ensured your own? The truth is, most of us could not. Modern life has made us comfortable, but also fragile. Medieval peasants were not strong by choice, they were strong because they had to be. Their lives were not measured in luxuries but in endurance, in sacrifice, and in a stubborn refusal to let the cold claim them. So, how did medieval peasants survive brutal winters without modern comforts? Not with ease, not with abundance, but with grit, community, and sheer resilience. They fought against hunger, against cold, against disease, and somehow, they endured. The castles, the towns, the fields that blossomed in spring, all of it was built on the backs of peasants who survived winters that would break us today. Perhaps the real question is not how they survived, but whether we could you lay down in the frozen dark, with nothing but a fading ember and the warmth of those beside you, and truly believe that spring would come again? Because for peasants of the Middle Ages, that belief was not hope, it was survival itself.